small worry here because Mick is the main writer for Social Economic Bulletin, and as there's, I don't think he's ever written anything I don't agree with. I hope I'm not going to repeat a lot of what he said. But my worry about where we are is that for a lot of people, then they're not, I think, aware of just the scale of the changes that are facing us. And I'm not talking about the problems of climate change. You heard that. I think they're much worse. They'll be much quicker than we think, that by the middle of this century we could see catastrophic environmental changes. But it's that more short-term issue of what's happening at the next election and the sort of choice that is facing us. I've spent my lifetime in a Labour Party I've always had disagreements with, but I always recognised it was the only vehicle for where we're going to see the change we want. And I've always worked with the groups outside that are a powerful pressure on that party to actually move it in the right direction. And that has never been as crucial a struggle as we're about to see in the next couple of years. If you may not have followed it, but the government's just appointed this ghastly little creature to oversee the National Health Service, who worked for Alan Milburn pushing through the attempt to privatise and open up the NHS to competition, has gone off and made a small fortune working in the private American healthcare. And clearly, if we were to see Cameron re-elected with or without the support of the Lib Dems, this would be a further 5 years which would change Britain beyond all recognition. What we've seen in the last 3.5 years is a complete waste of time. The growth figures you saw this week where Osborne was having an orgasm because it's 0.8%. Well, the outgoing Labour government in its last quarter had got slightly better figures than that, 1%. We have gone down after the banking crisis, and because policies were not inflicting the scale of cuts that this government has done, we were seeing a rate of growth which, had it not been interrupted by the austerity politics, would have meant we would have recaptured all the economic growth that has been lost by the end of 2011. 3.5 years just written off, not because these people are evil, they're stupid. They don't go and study economics. They believe all this crap, that Thatcher transformed and saved Britain, and we just have more cuts, more privatisation, continue cutting taxes on big corporations and the super rich, and we'll all do better. There's a simple reality that if you go and look at the data, in the 34 years rather, up until the election of Mrs. Thatcher, when we had strong trade unions, a growing public sector, major regulation, a top rate of tax of, was at 1.98%, but still at 84% when Labour lost. And then in came Thatcher with smash the unions, deregulate, cut taxes on the rich, and the economy will soar. Well, the rate of growth and the rate of investment in the 34 years since Thatcher came to power has not equalled the bad old days of strong trade unions, because those were a check on the excesses of corporate greed. There was also the check of the Soviet Union, actually. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the destruction of the trade union power base, corporate Britain, like corporations around the world, have been able to reconfigure the whole structure of the economy for their benefit. So in that period up to 79, where inequality of wealth halved from the end of the First World War to the election of Thatcher, it's now back to where it was. And if they get another term, they will press ahead relentlessly with that. And I'm not certain anything that makes life decent in this country would still be there in any recognisable form at the end of that second Cameron term. So it's a question of defeating Cameron, but making sure we win the economic argument. In my lifetime, there's only been 2 governments that changed the political direction of Britain. I was only a month old when they took office, but Attlee's post-war Labour government, which created the welfare state, inheriting a wartime economy, recast it to rebuild our manufacturing, created a decent welfare system, a system based on full employment, and saw the Tory party have to adapt to that. So the Tories won the 1951 election by promising to build more council houses than Labour did. Did not roll back the nationalisations. And in particular, I mean, the one which, when you go back and look at it, you would have expected it, privatising the Bank of England. No, they kept it in the public sector. And then came Thatcher. And in the same way that the Labour Party in the mid-1940s won the economic debate about a fairer society, Thatcher, with the backing of the Mail and the Telegraph and the others, won the economic debate completely falsely, that if we did all this deregulation and we reduced the tax burden on the rich, all boats would rise, you know, there'd be a trickle down. And of course, I mean, what trickled down on us from the rich was not very attractive at all. And we just have to look at where we are in comparison with that. So how do we get out of this? We have to be absolutely honest with people. I'm not in favour of borrowing to cover revenue spending, because you store up the debt that your children and grandchildren have. I'm in favour of borrowing for infrastructure, for building homes, building new rails and undergrounds and all that. That puts money into the economy. Basically, for about every 100 million you spend on infrastructure investment, you get about £250 million return in the long term. This is an alternative, though, to borrowing money, and we had a recent think tank paper come out saying the next Labour government could borrow another £20 billion to help with the revenue budget, the day-to-day spending. Or you could just have a fairer bloody tax system. This is what we have to nail. 5% of our national wealth disappears each year in illegal tax avoidance. And this bloody Grangemouth scandal. Here you've got a guy a billionaire, who owns Grangemouth, but he's based in terms of his company in Switzerland, so presumably he pays virtually all tax, and it's all siphoned off. And with his great wealth, he's able to impose on the workers, with the threat of destroying their lives and their community, that they have to give up the bulk of their pension rights, having paid into it for decades. If there's a gap in a pension fund, it's because big business, the employers, didn't put in the fair share to actually guarantee that pension fund. So we actually need to come on, absolutely, we're not a poor country. We're one of the 10 richest nations on the face of the planet. It's just the inequality of wealth has created an impoverished 30%, and now, of course, with the squeeze on wages and the soaring price of the absolute essentials like energy and food, we're seeing the middle third squeezed down as well. Here is the chance to create that alliance that the 1945 government did between the working class and the middle class to produce a fairer society. We have to show that the vast majority of people, basically everyone except the top 1 or 2%, would be better off in a fairer tax system. 5%, as I say, disappears illegally, another 5% by legal tax avoidance. And I always agreed with Private Eye, particularly when they said, I had a Swiss bank account, Gaddafi had put $250,000 in. But they do a lot of work on just the scale of tax fraud going on. And the shocking thing is, the senior officials in the Revenue and Customs interchange between making our tax laws and regulations and then going working for the accountancy firms that actually help big business to avoid paying any bloody tax at all. I mean, this government has cut the number of tax inspectors chasing tax fraud and tax avoidance. It's not, that we are unable to pay for a decent quality of life. It's just that a small elite is ripping us off, and the individual, the billionaires, they're actually just a small change. It's the great corporations. And there's one simple way of tackling this. An incoming Labour government can say to big business in this country, you pay your fair share of tax, or we will shift the tax system to a tax on turnover, which you can't avoid. You pay perhaps 30% of your daily intake in sales for goods and services, something you couldn't get out of. I think, frankly, the threat of that would bring them to heel. That would give us the money so that an incoming Labour government doesn't have to borrow £20 billion to fill the gap in funding public services or pensions. The money would come from those corporations that have actually lost all sense of being part of a national, a nation state. Because that is the reality. Go back 40 years, big businesses in Britain were British, they were run by people who were British, they all broadly had a shared set of values. Since the destruction of the Soviet Union and the creation of a genuinely global economy in which great corporations just reach across boundaries, you've created a small corporate elite without any commitment to any particular nation or any particular society, just fueling their own greed, enriching themselves. And that we have to change. And as I say, this is most probably the last and best chance we'll have in our lives to change it, to defeat this government, but then build the popular pressure that makes sure that next Labour government delivers as the 1945 Labour government delivered, and win that economic debate so even the Tories have to accept the reality of the changes that we make.